poverty has a technical definition, and it has what I think is a philosophical definition. The technical definition is set by government agencies and bureaucrats. In America, it's $15,000 a year of income for an individual, $20,000 for a married couple. If you're below that, you're technically below the poverty line. The World Bank calls $1 a day. You've heard someone living on $1 a day living in poverty. It's been revised to $1.25. Those are the kind of technical, numerical terms. I personally can't wrap my arms around that. I don't know how to think about someone living in poverty by just going to the numbers. And so I think one of the things that we've been learning in our 4 years of dealing with communities that are technically very, very poor, in many ways spiritually very, very rich, is to try to grapple with what does poverty mean for the people that we care most deeply about in Tanzania. And then obviously what will be the question of how we can help address that concern with our partners. The United Nations has, I think, a fairly interesting definition of poverty. They move away from the statistical approach and more of a philosophical one. And they bring up this point that it's a denial of choices and opportunities. So poverty levels might be fundamentally different in the developed world versus the developing world, but it has a common theme. The common theme is an individual who can't necessarily pursue his or her fullest potential because of the structural poverty through which they suffer. So for me, it's actually a question of human dignity. It's not just a material state. It's not how much cash do you have in your pocket, your ability to pay the bills. It's a question of you, with all your raw human potential, do you have the ability to execute on what God has given you in society, or are you fundamentally stunted because of material conditions? And so we have a kind of theory about how poverty works, and it's not something that has come from textbooks or from a lot of the wonderful studies that are coming out of academia. We probably should be more informed on that level, but it really comes from interactions with the people on the ground, the communities that we've been living with for the last 4 years. And the way we kind of see this is that it's a lack of productivity in society creates the poverty, right? There's something in society that is broken that makes an individual, family, community unable to lift itself out of impoverished means. And then once you're in that state of poverty, you cannot choose. Now, there's some kind of interesting research coming out of MIT that's saying you have a huge number of choices, but they're very, very difficult choices. The question of where you go to get your water at a given day, how do you figure out whether you're going to give your child medicine versus food. There's lots of choices, but they are survival choices. They're not the choices that can allow someone to live up to that greater potential. And that lack of choice deprives dignity. If we stay on the word dignity, it's pretty important, because there's ways in which you could hypothetically give someone choice, but not necessarily enhance their dignity. And that's something that we'll probably come back to a number of times throughout the weekend. And so now, you all are going to go and embed yourself with a community for a year, a community that is technically impoverished. And I think the number one task that you have to do is decide what is breaking this productivity in the society. And I think in an academic setting, it's very easy to look at all the macro indicators. The roads, the legal system, the political system. All of those are contributing to an incredible lack of productivity. But if you just focus on those, there's a sense of helplessness. There's not much you can do, at least at this level, on those big issues. But in the community level, there are also aspects that are limiting productivity that hypothetically we could help affect. So then that goes into what is our practice? How are we actually, if we do somehow figure out, to the best of our abilities with limited knowledge and not understanding fully the language of the culture, if we can figure out a bit where that lack of productivity is and how we can help it, what do you then do? Restoring the productivity is going to get us to the next level of eliminating poverty. And productivity, and this is, I think, what makes us a little bit different than a lot of organizations, we believe productivity first and foremost comes from human capital. Again, human capital has a better chance of surviving if it has excellent educational institutions, if it has good health care, if it has all the things that we really benefit from here in the United States. But there's also stuff that human capital can improve on, even just within the means that an impoverished farmer in Tanzania has at their disposal today. So the question is, what is human capital? Human capital is a really interesting mix, I think, of what you have individually. What's your skill set? What do you know? What don't you know? What's your experience? What's your maturity? What's your wisdom? And then how does that interact with society? So no individual is an island. What are the connections? How can you motivate 2 or 3 people to work with you in a common endeavor? How can you share collective knowledge, collective resources in order to make yourself more productive than you would be on your own? And so within that nexus is the human capital element that we are really focusing on to bring back that productivity to society. With human capital, now we're starting to see choice and opportunity. Because now, with resources, people in their own individual developments, in their communities, can move even farther down the path of stepping out of poverty, restoring productivity into their society. And then, the end result of that is choice and opportunity. So if we are successful in the project of a farmers cooperative or a farmers group in Bungu or Pombo Machimoto, and if the productivity increases, if the distribution increases, now there's wealth. And wealth in and of itself is not a good. The question is, how do you use it? Do you use it to improve your house? Do you use it to send your child to teacher's college? Do you use it to increase that human capital development so that now, instead of being in a vicious cycle, we've generated a virtuous one? So the question you need to be asking yourself, I think, every day when you're in the village is, what am I doing in order to create this environment in which human capital can start to flourish? So instead of just looking at people don't have money, they don't have food, if we look at the fact that people don't have the ability internally or communally to be productive, then I think the question of poverty shifts. The way in which we look at poverty shifts. The way in which we interact with our partners shifts. So we have means and results. The means is agriculture. When we first started 2Seeds, you could go to a Tanzanian village and say, everything is broken. I need to focus on women's rights. I need to focus on healthcare. I need to focus on education. All of those things are aspects of society that are profoundly unproductive. They need help. But let's just focus on agriculture, because we're meeting the Tanzanian partners where they are. The majority of them are smallholder farmers. So let's use that as the means to start stepping up this level of human capital, start restoring productivity to society. And then the results: more food to eat, more produce to sell. And I think when you look at Mama Tatu, this is Sam's, I think, great point when he discusses this, is when she looks at that green pepper, I'll guarantee you that anyone in your pocket right now, you can exchange your Starbucks coffee and give her enough money to buy that green pepper. If poverty is just about addressing material needs, we could be a lot more efficient. We can go and take all the money from 2Seeds and just donate it. But this isn't charity, and I think if you did that, you wouldn't see the look of pride that's on Mama Tatu's face. That is not someone who is just finding material abatements to crushing poverty. That is someone whose human dignity, I think, is really coming into shine. And that's why we work so hard, sometimes for little or even no results, because we are focused on the human dignity of these individuals rather than their material constraints. And so the purpose of 2Seeds, the purpose of what you all are going to be doing when you're in the village, is to build that capacity. This is really hard work. It's very nebulous. There's not a roadmap. But you're in this society, you're in this village, you're in a very tight-knit community. You always want to be thinking about, how can I enable this environment so that people have the ability to take control of their life, to be masters of their own economic destiny. That, for us, is the alleviation of poverty. Not just the material ends, but the actual structure of how a given society, even if it's just at the individual, family, or small group level, can get back onto a path of productivity and of human dignity. That's the 2Seeds ethos. That's how I think we look at things a little bit differently. We don't have lots of best practices from the development world. We're a scratch organization. We're figuring this thing out as we go. But what's really important to all of us is that we're on the same page in terms of what our ethos is. And that this aspect of treating our partners as equals, because there are some ways in which they have profound human dignity that we are deprived of living in the West. And if you don't come out of this experience gaining as much from them as they do from you, then I think there's a problem with the system of how we're operating. And so to keep that in mind, I think will really differentiate how we represent 2Seeds and how we represent development work in the places where we operate in Tanzania. So I just wanted to take a little bit of time to talk through the philosophy behind all of this. And we have a number of different presentations that are going to dig into different aspects. But this is a full year's work in which everything you have will be devoted to it. Your community is going to be 2Seeds. The people you work with are going to be 2Seeds. The villages are going to understand you through 2Seeds. This is very holistic. This is not a 9-to-5 job. And so we will look through today a couple of different aspects of how 2Seeds operates on the ground. But just know that this is a year-long process. It's very, very complicated. And it's very rich. And so we can't boil everything into one weekend. But we are willing to give it a shot to at least get you guys started on the path of thinking down this environment. Any questions?